Mom said I was too emotional to handle the will, so I let the lawyer handle her instead. I was sitting in the living room of the house my father built with his own two hands, holding a cup of cold coffee between my trembling fingers, when my mother walked through the front door as if she owned the place. Well, technically she did, or thought she did. "You're still here," she said, taking off her sunglasses and looking at me as if I were a stain on the carpet. "I thought you would have gotten the message by now." I didn't answer. I just took a sip of the bitter coffee and watched her walk through the house, touching the furniture, appraising each object as if she were mentally calculating its worth. She always did that. Since Dad died 3 months ago, my mother Linda had transformed into someone I no longer recognized. Or maybe she had always been this way, and my father just kept her in check. "You know, Emily," she continued, sitting on the leather sofa Dad loved so much, "you've always been too emotional, ever since you were a child. Remember when you cried on your 12th birthday because the color of the cake wasn't exactly what you wanted?" I remembered, but she always told that story wrong. I cried because she forgot my birthday and bought a last-minute cake from the corner bakery. A cake with the name Jennifer still written in pink frosting. "Mom, I didn't come here to discuss my childhood. I came because Dad's lawyer called and said he needed to speak with me." Linda sighed dramatically, crossing her legs. "That's exactly what I want to talk about. Emily, honey, you know your father loved me very much. We were married for 32 years. He would have wanted me to take care of everything." Something in her tone made me sit up straighter. "What do you mean by that?" "The will, Emily. I know you're expecting something, but I need to be honest with you." She paused, and for the first time, I noticed a calculating glint in her eyes. "Your father left everything to me. The house, the savings, the cabin on the lake, everything." My heart pounded. "That's not true. Dad told me just a few days before he died that he made sure I would be well taken care of. He mentioned a will." "Oh, Emily," my mother smiled, but it was a cold, humorless smile. "Your father was on heavy medication. You know that. He barely knew where he was in his final days. He said all sorts of things that didn't make sense." Tears stung my eyes, and I hated them, hated proving her point about me being too emotional. "He was lucid when he spoke to me, completely lucid, and he said—" "He said what?" Linda interrupted, leaning forward. "That he loved you, that you were special? Emily, he told me the same things. He loved us both. But in the end, he trusted me to make the tough decisions. Because you, my dear, were always too good, too much of a dreamer, too emotional to handle practical matters." I stood up, anger beginning to replace the sadness. "I'm going to talk to the lawyer. He'll tell me the truth." "Ah, about that." My mother stood up too, smoothing down the expensive dress she had certainly bought with Dad's money. "I've already spoken with Richard. He agrees with me that it would be better if you didn't get involved in the process. You're grieving, emotionally unstable. You're in no condition to make important decisions." "You spoke with Richard?" I repeated, incredulous. "Dad's lawyer?" "Our lawyer," she corrected, "and he understands the situation. In fact, he suggested it might be best for you to seek counseling, to deal with the loss, you know. There are very good clinics in Oregon, quiet places where you could—" "Are you trying to have me committed?" Linda laughed, but it was a rehearsed, practiced laugh. "Don't be dramatic, Emily. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You turn everything into a Greek tragedy. I'm just worried about you. As a mother, it's my duty to look after your well-being." I grabbed my purse, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the strap. "I'm leaving now, but this isn't over, Mom." "Emily," she called as I reached the door. I turned to look at her one last time. She stood there, in the middle of the living room, surrounded by Dad's memories, and there was something on her face I had never seen before. Triumph. Pure and simple triumph. "Your father built this house for me," she said softly. "Every plank, every nail. He did it all for me. And now it's mine. Everything is mine. The sooner you accept that, the better for all of us." I left without answering, but as I drove through the familiar streets of Cedar Falls, Oregon, a small town where everyone knew everyone's story, a cold determination began to form in my chest. My mother was right about one thing. I was emotional, but she was wrong about everything else. I wasn't weak, I wasn't incapable, and I certainly wasn't going to accept this without a fight. 3 days later, I was sitting in the law office of Morrison and Associates in downtown Portland, 2 hours from Cedar Falls. The office was smaller than I imagined, occupying the 3rd floor of an old brick building. But the receptionist was kind, and when I explained I needed help with a contested will, she directed me to a conference room and said that attorney Margaret Chen would be with me in a few minutes. Margaret appeared exactly 7 minutes later. She was an Asian American woman in her 50s with short salt and pepper hair, red-framed glasses, and a handshake that conveyed more confidence than any words could. "Miss Williams?" she asked, sitting across from me with a notepad and a pen. "My assistant told me you're having trouble with your father's will." I nodded, pulling a folder from my purse with all the documents I had managed to gather. "My father, Thomas Williams, passed away 3 months ago. He was 63, pancreatic cancer." "I'm very sorry for your loss," Margaret said, and from her tone, I knew she genuinely meant it. "Thank you. Before he died, my father told me he had a will, that he made sure I would be taken care of. But my mother is saying he left everything to her. The house, the savings, a cabin on Crater Lake, everything." Margaret made some notes. "And have you seen the will?" "No. My mother won't let me see it. She says I'm too emotional to handle it. She even spoke with his lawyer, a Richard Hoffman in Cedar Falls, and apparently he agrees with her." Margaret looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Interesting. In Oregon, even if your mother is the executor of the will, you have a legal right to see the document if you are a potential beneficiary or heir. She can't just hide it from you." "She can't?" I asked, feeling a spark of hope. "No, and if Richard Hoffman is advising her to do so, he's violating the profession's ethical rules." Margaret leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Emily, I need to ask you some tough questions. Are you ready?" I nodded. "Was your father mentally competent when he passed away? Was there any evidence of dementia, confusion, or undue influence?" "He was on pain medication," I admitted, "but he was lucid most of the time, especially in the last conversations we had. He specifically told me 2 weeks before he died that I didn't need to worry about money after he was gone." "And what was his relationship with your mother?" I hesitated. This was the hard part. Complicated. They hadn't been happy for a long time. They didn't get divorced because of me, I think, and because Dad was old school, a practicing Catholic, believed in marriage forever. Margaret made more notes. "Was there any prenuptial agreement?" "Not that I know of." "Does your mother work?" "She was an elementary school teacher for years, but she retired 5 years ago." "And your father?" "He was a civil engineer, worked at the same company for 30 years. He had a good salary, saved a lot. He built our house by himself, on weekends, over 3 years." Margaret stopped writing and looked at me directly. "Emily, based on what you've told me, there are enough grounds to at least request a copy of the will and investigate further. But I need to be honest with you. Family cases are complicated, emotionally draining, and expensive. Are you sure you want to do this?" I thought of the triumphant look on my mother's face. I thought of Dad's last words, the promise in his eyes. I thought of how my mother had always treated me like an incapable, weak, unstable child. "I'm sure," I said. Margaret smiled. "Then let's get started." To understand how I got here, sitting in a law office in Portland preparing to battle my own mother, I need to go back in time. I need to tell you how everything started to fall apart long before Dad's death. I was 28 when my father was diagnosed. It was in March, right after my birthday. I was working as a marketing manager at a tech company in Seattle, living my life, paying for my own apartment, doing everything right. Then I got the call. It was Dad. His voice sounded different, weaker. "Emily, honey, I need to tell you something." My heart knew before he said the words. Cancer, stage 4, 6 months to a year, maybe less. I dropped everything. I quit my job, sublet my apartment, and moved back to Cedar Falls. My mother was there, of course, but from day one, it was clear she wasn't going to take care of him. Not really. "Emily, you know I don't do well with hospitals," she said when I arrived, as if that were an acceptable excuse. "And your father has always been stubborn. He won't let me help anyway." That was a lie. Dad wanted help, needed help, but he had learned over 3 decades of marriage that Linda only bid things when there was some benefit for her. So I was the one who stayed. I was the one who woke up at 3 in the morning when he needed medication. I was the one who took him to chemotherapy sessions in Portland twice a week, a 4-hour round trip. I was the one who held his hand when the pain was so intense he couldn't speak. And it was during those long nights, those stolen moments between medications and pain, that Dad started to talk, really talk. "Your mother and I," he said one night, his voice hoarse but clear, "we shouldn't have stayed together, not after you grew up." We were in his room, on the top floor of the house he had built. My mother was visiting friends, as she always did. Translation, she was at the bridge club spending money he had worked his fingers to the bone to earn. "Dad, you don't have to." "No, Emily, I do. I need you to understand." He took my hand, his fingers cold and frail. "I stayed because of you. And then, out of shame, out of pride, because in my family, we don't give up. But I should have given up, honey. I should have given you a better example of what a real marriage is." Tears streamed down my face. "You gave me the best example of everything, Dad. Of hard work, of dedication, of love." He smiled faintly. "Love. Yes, I love you, Emily, more than anything in this world. And that's why I had to make some decisions. Decisions your mother isn't going to like." "What decisions?" "You'll find out when the time is right." He squeezed my hand. "But I need you to be strong, stronger than I was. Don't let anyone tell you who you are, not even your mother." I didn't fully understand at the time. I thought he was delirious from the morphine. But now, sitting in that conference room 3 months later, his words made perfect sense. The first meeting with Margaret Chen was just the beginning. She immediately sent a formal notification to Richard Hoffman, the lawyer in Cedar Falls, demanding a copy of Thomas Williams's will. The law was on our side, she explained. As a daughter and presumed heir, I had an absolute right to see the document. Richard replied a week later. His response was odd. "Look at this." Margaret showed me the email, pushing her laptop across the table. "He's saying he can't provide the will without the express permission of Mrs. Linda Williams, the executor of the estate." "But you said that's illegal." "It is, and he knows it." Margaret frowned, rereading the email. "Unless, Emily, is it possible your mother is paying Richard to protect her? Or there's something in the will he doesn't want us to see?" "Like what?" "I don't know, but we're going to find out." She started typing furiously. I'm filing a formal petition in probate court. That will force them to hand over the document. And I'm also filing an ethics complaint against Richard Hoffman for obstruction. I watched Margaret work, feeling a mix of admiration and fear. This was really happening. I was suing my own mother. That night, my phone rang. It was Linda. "Emily, what do you think you're doing?" she hissed as soon as I answered. Not a hello, not a how are you. Straight to the attack. "Exercising my legal rights, Mom." "Your rights? Your rights?" She laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "You have no rights here, Emily. Your father left me in charge. He trusted me, not you. Then why are you so afraid to let me see the will?" Silence on the other end. For a long moment, I thought she had hung up. Then she spoke, her voice lower, more controlled. "You want a war, Emily? Because I can give you a war. I can tell everyone in Cedar Falls how you abandoned your father in his last months, how you were always too busy in Seattle to visit him." My breath hitched. That's a lie. I dropped everything to take care of him. "That's not what people will believe when I'm done telling my version. You know how this town works. Who are they going to believe? The grieving widow or the ungrateful daughter who's trying to steal her own mother's inheritance?" I hung up on her. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. But along with the fear and anger, there was something else growing inside me. Determination. Margaret was right. This was going to get ugly, but I wasn't going to back down. 2 weeks later, we had our first victory. The probate court judge in Jackson County ordered Richard Hoffman to hand over a copy of the will immediately. He had 5 days to comply. I was in my temporary apartment in Portland, a small studio I'd rented by the month, when Margaret called. "Emily, are you sitting down?" My heart pounded. What happened? "I received the will. And Emily, you need to see this in person. Can you come to my office now?" I drove there, breaking every speed limit. Margaret was waiting for me in the conference room, a thick document spread on the table in front of her. Her face was serious. "Emily, sit down." I obeyed, my legs weak. "Is it bad?" "Depends on your perspective." Margaret pushed the document toward me. "This is the will Richard Hoffman filed, dated January 15th of this year, 2 months before your father's death. In it, Thomas Williams leaves everything to Linda Williams. The house, the bank accounts, the cabin, investments, everything." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "But he told me." "Wait, I'm not finished." Margaret pulled out another document, this one thinner. "This is the will I found in the public records. It was filed with the probate court 7 years ago, when your father was 56. And in this one, Emily, you inherit 50% of everything. The house, specifically, was left entirely to you. Your mother receives the other half of the liquid assets." My head was spinning. 2 wills? 2 wills, Margaret confirmed. And here's the problem. The most recent will automatically revokes the previous one, unless we can prove that the second will was made under duress, undue influence, or while your father was not mentally competent. "He was sick," I said quickly. "In January, he already knew he had cancer. He was scared, vulnerable." Exactly what I'm thinking. Margaret opened her laptop. "I need his complete medical records, everything from January onward. And I need you to think very carefully about anything strange that happened around that time. Any change in his behavior, any pressure your mother might have applied." I closed my eyes, trying to remember. January, 2 months before I moved back to Cedar Falls. I was still in Seattle, talking to Dad on the phone a few times a week. He had just gotten the diagnosis. He was starting to plan his treatment. And then I remembered a conversation. Dad had called me late one night, which was unusual. His voice sounded strange, strained. Emily, your mother is insisting I review my papers, as she calls them, says I need to make sure she's protected if something happens to me. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. It seemed reasonable, a sick man taking care of his wife. But now? Margaret, I said, opening my eyes, my mother forced him. I know she did. My father would never have voluntarily disinherited me. Never. Then that's what we'll prove. Margaret gathered the papers. Get ready, Emily. This is going to get ugly. Your mother won't go down without a fight. She was right. Oh God, was she right. And before we continue with the rest of this story, I need to stop for a moment and speak to you, the person listening right now. I know many of you have been through similar situations, maybe not with wills or inheritances, but with family members who tried to control you, diminish you, make you believe you weren't strong enough to fight for your rights. This story is for you. It's for every person who has ever been called too emotional, too sensitive, too weak. Because here's the truth, our emotion is not a weakness. Our sensitivity is not a flaw. And when we finally decide to fight, we are so much stronger than anyone ever imagined. If this story is touching you in some way, if you have your own story of a family struggle to share, leave it in the comments. Let's build a community here, a space where we can support each other. And if you're going through something similar right now, I want you to know you are not alone. There are people here who get it, who have been there, who survived, and came out stronger. And please, subscribe to the channel. Not because I need the numbers, but because these stories need to be told. These voices need to be heard. And together, we are a family. Now, let's get back to it, because you haven't seen anything yet. The part where my mother really shows her true colors, that's coming up next. The court notice arrived at the house in Cedar Falls 3 days later. I wasn't there to see my mother's reaction, but I can imagine it perfectly. Linda Williams hated 2 things above all else: losing control and being publicly questioned. And now, thanks to my formal petition contesting the will, she was facing both. Her response was swift and brutal. First, she called the entire family, aunts, uncles, cousins I barely knew. She told them her version of the story, that I was an ungrateful daughter trying to steal the inheritance of a vulnerable widow, that I had abandoned my father during his illness and now wanted to claim his money, that I had always been troubled, unstable, jealous of her. My Aunt Karen, Dad's sister, was the first to call me. Her voice was cold when I answered her call. Emily, Linda told me what you're doing. I can't believe you're capable of something so cruel. Aunt Karen, you don't know the whole story. I know enough. Your father just died, the woman is grieving, and you're dragging her to court? For money? It's not about the money, I tried to explain, feeling tears threaten. It's about the truth. It's about what Dad really wanted. What he wanted was in his will, a will he made when he was perfectly lucid, by the way. Linda showed it to me, January, months before he got really sick. She's lying to you. No, Emily, you're the one who's lying. To yourself, maybe, but it's still a lie. Karen sighed. I always knew you had issues with Linda. The 2 of you never got along. But to use your father's death as an excuse to attack your mother, that's low, even for you. She hung up before I could respond. That was just the beginning. In the following days, cousins blocked my number. Uncle Mike, who had always been kind to me, sent me an email saying he was disappointed in my actions. Cousin Jennifer posted on Facebook, without tagging me, but obviously about me, about greedy family members who don't respect the dead. I was being cast out of the family I had known my entire life, and it was all because of Linda's lies. Margaret had warned me this would happen. Manipulators are always great at controlling narratives, she said when we met at her office the following week. Your mother is doing exactly what I expected, isolating you, destroying your credibility, making you look like the villain." "It's working," I said, my voice breaking. "Even people who've known me my whole life are believing her." "Because she's telling them the story they want to hear. It's easier to believe a daughter is greedy than to accept a mother is manipulative." Margaret pushed a box of tissues across the table. "But we have something she doesn't: evidence." Dad's medical records arrived that afternoon. Margaret spent hours poring over every page, making notes, highlighting dates and symptoms. When she finally looked up, there was a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "Emily, look at this. On January 10th, 5 days before the supposed new will was signed, your father was hospitalized for 3 days. He was having severe complications from chemotherapy: confusion, disorientation, extreme nausea. The doctors adjusted his pain medication, significantly increasing the dosage of opioids." My heart sped up. And then 5 days later, he supposedly signed a new will? Exactly. A man who was so sick he had to be hospitalized, who was under the heavy influence of pain medication, suddenly decides to completely rewrite his will to disinherit his only daughter? Margaret slapped the table. No judge is going to believe that was a voluntary and informed decision. So we have a case? We have more than a case. We have a timeline that proves undue influence. She started organizing the documents. "But I need one more thing. Witnesses. Someone who can attest to your father's mental state at that time. Someone who saw how your mother treated him." I immediately thought of Dr. Patricia Moore, Dad's oncologist. She had seen everything. The appointments where Mom complained that the treatment was costing too much. The times she left Dad waiting alone in the chemotherapy room because she had more important things to do. There's his doctor and nurses, the hospice care team that came to the house in the last few months. Perfect. I'll need names and contacts. I spent the next 2 weeks helping Margaret build the case. We contacted Dr. Moore, who agreed to testify. She was careful with her words, professional, but what she said was devastating to Mom's case. "Thomas was struggling mentally and physically in January," she explained in her formal statement. "The combination of emotional stress, chemotherapy side effects, and pain medication would have certainly affected his ability to make complex decisions. I would never recommend a patient in that state make important legal decisions." We also got statements from 3 nurses who worked with Dad. They all mentioned Linda's controlling behavior, how she frequently argued with Thomas about money, how she complained about the cost of treatment in front of him. One nurse, Sarah Chen, was particularly blunt. Mrs. Williams constantly asked how much time Mr. Williams had left, not in a worried or sad way. It was more calculating, like she was planning something. But the strongest evidence came from an unexpected place. I was cleaning out boxes in the garage of the Cedar Falls house one afternoon when Mom wasn't there, looking for Dad's personal documents. The house was technically still in probate, so I had a legal right to be there, though I knew Linda would be furious if she found out. In the bottom of a box marked Taxes 2020-2024, I found something strange. A spiral notebook, the cheap kind you buy at any stationery store. Dad's handwriting on the cover: "Personal notes." I sat on the dusty garage floor and opened it. They were journal entries. Not every day, but occasionally. Observations about his illness, his fears, his thoughts. And then, dated January 14th, I read this: "Linda came to me today about the will again, 3rd time this week. She says I'm being selfish, that Emily doesn't need anything because she has her career, that I need to think of her, my wife, who will be left alone. I'm so tired, so confused. The pain is so bad, I can barely think straight." Maybe she's right. Maybe I am being selfish. But something doesn't feel right. I need to talk to Emily first. But Linda says I can't worry Emily, that she has her own life. I'm so lost. And the next day, January 15th. Richard came today with the papers. Linda practically pushed the pen into my hand. I signed. God forgive me, I signed. But I don't feel right about it. It's not right. Emily should have the house. I built that house thinking of her, so she would have roots. But it's done now. Linda says it's too late to change my mind now. My hands were trembling as I held the notebook. Tears fell onto the pages, smudging the ink. This was everything we needed. Written proof, in Dad's own words, that he was coerced. I called Margaret immediately. She could barely contain the excitement in her voice. Emily, this is gold. First-person evidence of coercion and undue influence. And what's more, proof that he regretted it immediately. What do we do now? Now we go to court and we watch your mother's case fall apart. But before we could do that, Linda made her final move. I was at my apartment in Portland when I received a call from an unknown number. I normally wouldn't answer, but something told me to pick it up. Emily Williams? Yes, who is this? My name is Detective James Morrison from the Cedar Falls Police Department. I need to ask you a few questions about stolen property. My blood ran cold. Stolen property? Yes, ma'am. Your mother, Linda Williams, filed a police report claiming you broke into her property in Cedar Falls and stole valuable documents. She says she has video of you entering the garage without permission. That house is still in probate. I have a legal right. I understand, ma'am, but she's also claiming you took jewelry and other personal items. She has a list here. A pearl necklace valued at $15,000, 2 rings, a Rolex watch. That's a lie, I was shouting now. I didn't take any of that. I only took papers, my father's personal documents. All right, ma'am, calm down. That's why I'm calling. I need you to come down to the station to talk. We can sort this out civilly. My mind was spinning. This was a trap. Linda was trying to make me look like a criminal. If I were arrested, my credibility would be destroyed. The probate case would be jeopardized. Detective Morrison, I'm going to call my lawyer and get back to you. I'm not saying another word without legal representation. That's your choice, ma'am, but the longer you wait, the worse it looks. I hung up and immediately called Margaret. She answered on the first ring. Emily? My mother accused me of theft. She's saying I stole jewelry. There was a pause. Then Margaret laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had seen this game before. Of course she did. It's the last move of someone who's losing. She's trying to intimidate you, make you back down, destroy your credibility before we go to court. Will it work? Not if we play it right. I could hear Margaret typing. I'm calling the detective now. I'll explain that you were on the property legally, that everything is documented, and that the only things you removed were papers vital to the probate case. And as for the jewelry, we'll demand she prove those pieces exist and that you took them. I'll bet you she can't. How do you know? Because, Emily, this is the manipulator's playbook. Create drama, create doubt, make accusations that are impossible to completely disprove. But she made a mistake. She escalated too far. Jewelry valued at $15,000? A Rolex? We'll ask her to provide receipts, photos, insurance records. And when she can't, we'll have her for filing a false police report. Over the next 3 days, the situation unfolded exactly as Margaret predicted. Detective Morrison requested evidence of the stolen jewelry. Linda provided vague photos of jewelry that could be the ones she claimed, but with no receipts, no appraisals, no proof they were as valuable as she said. Margaret sent the detective copies of the court orders, giving me access to the property. She sent a detailed list of everything I had removed: documents, personal papers, the notebook, nothing of significant monetary value. The charges were quietly dropped. But the damage had been done in the family. Now it wasn't just about the will. It was about stolen jewelry, breaking and entering, a criminal daughter. Linda was winning the public relations battle, but she was about to lose the legal war. The preliminary hearing was set for a rainy Tuesday in June, 4 months after Dad's death. The Jackson County Probate Court was in Medford, a city 40 minutes from Cedar Falls. I arrived early with Margaret, wearing a conservative navy blue suit she insisted I buy. "Appearances matter," she said as we parked, "especially when your mother is going to do everything to paint you as unstable and greedy." Linda was already there when we entered the courthouse. She wore a black dress with pearls, her hair perfectly coiffed, an expression of carefully rehearsed sadness on her face. Richard Hoffman stood beside her, a man in his late 50s with graying hair and an expensive suit. When our eyes met, Linda turned her face away dramatically, as if the mere sight of me caused her profound pain. "Showtime," Margaret muttered. The judge was a woman named Barbara Chen, no relation to Margaret. She was about 60, with reading glasses hanging from a chain and an expression that suggested she had no patience for drama. "Good morning," she began once everyone was seated. "We are here to address the petition of Emily Ann Williams contesting the will of Thomas James Williams, deceased. I will hear opening arguments from both sides. Then we will decide how to proceed. Ms. Chen, you represent the petitioner?" Margaret stood. "Yes, Your Honor, and we would like to present evidence that the will dated January 15th was obtained through undue influence and coercion, while the deceased was under severe medical and emotional distress." Richard Hoffman stood as well. "Your Honor, this is simply a disgruntled daughter trying to invalidate her father's clearly expressed wishes. Mr. Williams was in full possession of his mental faculties when he revised his will. He made a conscious choice to leave his assets to his wife of 32 years. "Let's see the evidence," said Judge Chen. "Miss Chen, you may begin." Margaret opened her briefcase. "Your Honor, I would like to draw your attention to Mr. Williams's medical records." She distributed copies to the judge and to Richard. "As you can see, 5 days before the alleged signing of the new will, Mr. Williams was hospitalized for severe complications. He was on heavy pain medication, including high doses of opioids. He was experiencing confusion and disorientation." "That doesn't prove anything," Richard interrupted. "My client assured me that Mr. Williams was lucid on the day of the signing. I personally witnessed the signature." "Ah, yes," Margaret said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The signature that took place at Mr. Williams's home while he was bedridden just 3 days after leaving the hospital? How convenient." "Objection!" Richard shot to his feet. "Counsel is implying impropriety without basis." "Your Honor," Margaret continued calmly, "I have a basis. I would like to present as Exhibit B this notebook." She held up Dad's journal. "This is the personal diary of Thomas Williams, kept during his illness. With your permission, I would like to read 2 entries." Judge Chen nodded. "Proceed." Margaret read the entries from January 14th and 15th. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. I watched Linda's face turn pale, then flush red. Richard Hoffman looked genuinely shocked. When Margaret finished, Judge Chen took off her glasses. "This is very disturbing. Mr. Hoffman, were you aware of Mr. Williams's mental and emotional state when you witnessed this will?" Richard hesitated. He seemed lucid that day, Your Honor." "Seemed lucid?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Hoffman, as an experienced attorney, you didn't think it prudent to wait a few weeks, to give your client time to recover from hospitalization before making such drastic changes to his estate planning?" Mrs. Williams was concerned about the time he had left. She wanted to ensure his affairs were in order. I'm sure she did, Margaret said dryly. Your Honor, I would also like to submit sworn statements from Mr. Williams's oncologist, Dr. Patricia Moore, and 3 nurses who attended to him. All of them state that Mr. Williams was in no condition to make complex legal decisions in January. Judge Chen leafed through the documents Margaret had provided. The more she read, the deeper her frown became. Mrs. Williams, she said finally, looking directly at Linda, were you present when your late husband signed this will? Linda stood, her voice trembling. Yes, Your Honor. I was trying to help him take care of his affairs. He was so worried, so stressed. Worried about what, specifically? About leaving me provided for. He loved me, Your Honor. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of. And your daughter? Was he not concerned about leaving her provided for? Linda looked at me with something I can only describe as pure hatred. Emily has always been independent. She had her career, her own life. Thomas and I agreed she didn't need our help. That's a lie, I burst out before I could stop myself. Margaret touched my arm, a silent warning, but I couldn't stop. My father told me 2 weeks before he died that I would be taken care of. He would never have disinherited me if he wasn't pressured. Order. Judge Chen tapped her gavel softly. Miss Williams, I understand this is emotional, but I need you to control yourself. Sorry, Your Honor, I said, but my voice still shook with anger. The judge turned back to Richard. Mr. Hoffman, I am inclined to schedule a full hearing to examine these matters further. There is sufficient evidence here to seriously question the validity of this will. Richard stood up quickly. Your Honor, if I may, I would like to request a 15-minute recess to consult with my client. The judge waved a hand. Granted, 15 minutes. During the recess, I watched Richard and Linda talking intently in the hallway through the courtroom's glass doors. Linda was gesturing wildly, her face red with anger. Richard seemed to be trying to calm her, but she kept talking, her voice getting louder. They're going to offer a settlement, Margaret said beside me. How do you know? Because Richard is smart enough to see he's losing. And your mother, as manipulative as she is, isn't stupid. She knows that if we go to a full trial, the whole truth will come out. And she won't just lose the inheritance, she'll lose her reputation. Margaret was right. When we returned to the courtroom, Richard asked to speak. Your Honor, my client would like to propose a settlement. Mrs. Linda Williams is willing to split the estate 50-50 with Emily Williams, 50% for each of them. This would include the house, which would be sold, and the proceeds divided. I looked at Margaret. She kept her face neutral, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. And what about the cabin on Crater Lake? Margaret asked. Richard consulted with Linda quickly. The cabin would go to Mrs. Linda Williams, but she would pay Emily the fair market value for her half. No, I said, surprising everyone, including Margaret. I won't accept. Margaret touched my arm. Emily, we can discuss this in private. No, I repeated, louder this time. I stood up, looking directly at my mother. Dad left the house to me in the first will. That house that he built with his own 2 hands, every plank, every nail. He wanted me to have that house, and I'm going to fight for it. Linda finally spoke, her voice as cold as ice. You were always stubborn, Emily, just like your father, but stubbornness won't get you anywhere here. Maybe not, I replied, but the truth will. Judge Chen watched our exchange with interest. Ms. Williams, I understand your emotions, but you need to consider this carefully. A settlement would avoid months of expensive and stressful litigation. With all due respect, Your Honor, it's not about the money. It's about honoring my father's real wishes, and he wanted me to have that house. The judge nodded slowly. Very well. Then we will go to a full trial. I will schedule it for 2 months from now. That gives both sides time to prepare their cases completely. And Mr. Hoffman?" She looked at him sternly. "I suggest you carefully review your own procedures in this case. I will be paying special attention to your role in the creation of this second will." We left the courthouse in a light drizzle. Margaret was uncharacteristically silent as we walked to the car. "Do you think I did the right thing?" I finally asked. "Refusing the settlement?" She stopped, turned to me. "Honestly, I don't know. You could lose everything at trial. Juries are unpredictable. Judges are human. But," she smiled, "I admire your courage. And for the first time since I've met you, you seem truly strong. Not too emotional. Strong." Those words meant more to me than she would ever know. The next 2 months were hell. Linda escalated her smear campaign. She gave interviews to the local Cedar Falls newspaper, painting herself as a vulnerable widow being attacked by a greedy daughter. She organized a charity event in Dad's memory, but didn't invite me. She even got the priest at the Catholic church Dad attended to give a sermon about honoring one's parents, obviously directed at me. But something interesting started to happen too. People who really knew Dad started to speak up. His best friend, George Martinez, approached me one day in the parking lot of a supermarket in Medford. "Emily," he said, looking uncomfortable, "I need to tell you something. Your dad told me about that will, the new one. He called me a few days after he signed it. He was agitated, full of regret. He said Linda had pressured him, that he didn't know what he was doing. He wanted to change it back, but she convinced him it was too late, that you would understand." "Would you testify to that?" I asked, my heart racing. George hesitated. He was 65, retired, lived a quiet life. Testifying would mean getting involved in the drama, possibly becoming a target of Linda's wrath. "Yes," he said finally. "Tom was my best friend for 40 years. He deserves to have the truth told." With George's testimony, our case grew even stronger. But Linda had her own surprises in store. A week before the trial, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. This time, it was a woman. "Emily Williams?" "Yes?" "My name is Diane Foster. I was a close friend of your father's many years ago, before he married Linda." My heart stopped. Close friend? Girlfriend. We dated for 3 years, in the late 80s. We broke up when he met Linda. Diane paused. "I read about the case in the paper, and I thought you should know something. Your father tried to end his engagement to Linda. 2 weeks before the wedding, he came to me, said he'd made a mistake, that he still loved me. Why did they get married then?" "Because Linda told him she was pregnant." Diane let that hang in the air. "But here's the interesting thing. You were born 14 months after the wedding, not 9 months. There was no pregnancy before the wedding, Emily. It was a lie to trap your father." I felt dizzy. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because your father called me in January, shortly after he signed that will. He was crying, Emily. Said he had ruined his life by staying with Linda, and now he was ruining yours too. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would tell you the truth about who Linda really was." "Would you testify to that?" "I've done better. I saved the phone records. I have proof of his call on January 18th. And I kept old letters he wrote me before he married Linda, describing how he felt pressured, manipulated." When I told Margaret about Diane, she was silent for a long moment. "This changes everything," she said finally. "This isn't just about the will anymore. It's about establishing a pattern of manipulation that spans decades. Linda controlled your father from before the marriage, and she's trying to control you now. So what do? We bring her house of cards down, once and for all." The trial began on a sunny Monday in August. The courtroom was packed. Linda had brought support. Aunts, uncles, cousins, friends from the bridge club, even some people from church, all dressed in black, all looking at me with expressions that ranged from pity to contempt. I had Margaret, and the truth. Judge Chen entered, and everyone rose. When we sat down again, I felt the weight of all those eyes on me. Linda sat on the other side of the room with Richard Hoffman, her posture perfect, her face composed in a mask of wounded dignity. "Let's begin," said Judge Chen. "Mr. Hoffman, your opening." Richard stood, adjusting his suit. "Your Honor, this case is about one very simple thing: respecting the wishes of a dying man. Thomas Williams, in the final months of his life, made the conscious decision to update his estate plan. He chose to leave his assets to his devoted wife of 3 decades, Linda Williams. Now, his daughter, unable to accept her father's decision, is attempting to invalidate his clearly expressed wishes. It is a transparent attempt to get an inheritance her father consciously chose not to give her." He went on for another 10 minutes, painting Linda as a devoted wife and me as a selfish daughter. When he finished, Margaret stood up. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but penetrating, "this is not a story about a greedy daughter. This is a story about a pattern of manipulation and control that has lasted for over 30 years. It's about a man who was trapped in a marriage through lies, controlled throughout his life, and finally coerced on his deathbed into disinheriting the daughter he loved more than anything, and we are going to prove every word of it." Over the next few days, Margaret built our case piece by piece. First came Dr. Patricia Moore, who testified about Dad's medical state in January. "Mr. Williams was very debilitated at that time," she explained. "The combination of his illness, the side effects of chemotherapy, and the opioids prescribed for his pain would have certainly impaired his judgment. I would have strongly advised against making any major legal decisions." "Dr. Moore," Richard asked during cross-examination, "but it's possible Mr. Williams had moments of lucidity, isn't it?" "Yes, but those moments were unpredictable and brief, and even during those moments, his emotional state was extremely vulnerable. He was frightened, confused about the future, easily influenced." Next came George Martinez, Dad's best friend. His voice trembled as he described the call he received days after the will was signed. "Tom called me crying," George said. "He never cried, not once in 40 years of friendship. But he was sobbing on the phone, saying he'd made a terrible mistake, that Linda had pressured him into changing the will, that he didn't know what he was doing, that he had betrayed Emily." "Why didn't he change it back then?" Margaret asked softly. "He said he tried, but Linda convinced him it was too late, that Emily would understand, that he was being foolish. And he was so tired, so sick, he didn't have the strength to fight anymore." I watched Linda as George spoke. Her face remained perfectly composed, but I could see her hands gripping the arm of her chair, her knuckles white. Then came Sarah Chen, one of the nurses. She described the several times she heard Linda arguing with Dad about money, complaining about the cost of treatment. On one occasion, Sarah said, her voice steady, "I heard Mrs. Williams tell Mr. Williams that he was wasting their money on treatment that wasn't going to work anyway. He was visibly distraught after that, cried alone in his room for hours." Richard tried to discredit each witness, to suggest they were misinterpreting things, that they had their own motives. But his arguments sounded hollow against the weight of the evidence. And then, on the 4th day of the trial, Margaret called Diane Foster. Diane was 60, with short gray hair and a calm presence that immediately inspired trust. She walked to the witness stand with a straight back, took the oath, and sat down. "Mrs. Foster," Margaret began, "can you tell us about your relationship with Thomas Williams?" "We dated from 1987 to 1990. We were serious, talked about marriage. I loved him very much." "What happened?" "He met Linda in the summer of 1990. She was intense, focused on him in a way that was flattering, but also a little suffocating. Tom started to pull away from me. In November of that year, he ended our relationship. And then, 2 weeks later, he showed up at my door. He was agitated, full of regret, said he'd made a mistake, that Linda had moved too fast, that he felt pressured, that he still loved me." I could hear murmurs in the gallery. Linda was leaning toward Richard, whispering something urgently. "What happened then?" Margaret continued. "I said we needed time, that he needed to be sure. But before we could talk again, he called me. Linda had told him she was pregnant. They were getting married immediately." "And was there a pregnancy?" "No. Emily was born 14 months after the wedding. There was no baby before that, no miscarriage. It was a lie to trap Tom." The room erupted. Judge Chen banged her gavel several times. "Order! Order in the court!" Richard was on his feet. "Objection! This is speculation, character assassination." "It's relevant testimony about a pattern of behavior," Margaret countered. "We are establishing that Mrs. Williams has a history of manipulating Thomas Williams through dishonest means." "I'll allow it," said Judge Chen. "Continue, Miss Chen." "Mrs. Foster, did you have any contact with Mr. Williams after his marriage?" "Not for many years, but in January of this year, he called me. He was crying, said he had made a terrible mistake, that he had let Linda force him to do something that was going to hurt Emily, and he didn't know how to fix it." "Do you have proof of this call?" "I do. I kept the phone records." Diane produced documents. The call was on January 18th, 3 days after he signed the new will. It lasted 43 minutes. Margaret submitted the records as evidence. Then she asked her final question. "Mrs. Foster, why are you testifying today?" Diane looked directly at Linda. "Because Tom asked me to. In the last conversation we had, he made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would tell the truth about his marriage, about how he was trapped from the very beginning. He said he couldn't let Linda do to Emily what she had done to him. Control, manipulate, steal his autonomy." When Diane left the stand, I looked at Linda. For the first time, her mask had slipped. She looked pale, almost gray. Richard was frantically flipping through his papers, obviously trying to figure out how to counter this new development. Margaret then called her last witness, me. Walking to that stand was one of the hardest things I've ever done. All those people watching me, judging me, having already formed opinions about who I was. But when I sat down and looked at Margaret, I saw encouragement in her eyes. "Emily," she began gently, "can you tell us about your relationship with your father?" And I told them. I told them about the Saturday mornings helping him build the house, me handing him nails, him teaching me about wood and levels. I told them about how he never missed a school play, a softball game, a graduation. I told them about how he cried when I graduated from college, saying it was the proudest day of his life. "And when he got sick?" Margaret asked. "I dropped everything. My job in Seattle, my apartment. I moved home to take care of him. And he was so grateful, so relieved. He said I was his strength." "Your mother didn't take care of him?" "No, she was always busy. Church dinners, bridge club, outings with friends. She was rarely there for doctor's appointments, never for chemo sessions." "How would you describe their marriage?" I took a deep breath. Cold, distant. Dad slept in the guest room for the last 10 years. They barely spoke, except when Mom wanted money for something. He felt trapped, I think. But he believed in his vows, for better or for worse, till death do us part. And in his final weeks, did he mention the will? Yes. He held my hand and said, "Emily, I've taken care of you. When I'm gone, you'll be okay. The house is yours. I built every inch of it thinking of you." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I no longer cared about looking too emotional. This was my truth. "Why are you fighting for this, Emily?" Margaret asked softly. "Why not just take the settlement that was offered?" "Because it's not about the money. It never was. It's about honoring my father. He built that house for me, with love, over years. Every board he cut, every nail he hammered, he was thinking of me. And I looked at Linda, she stole that from him. She manipulated him when he was at his weakest, most vulnerable, most afraid. And I will not let her get away with it." Richard cross-examined me, tried to paint me as dramatic, tried to suggest I was making up stories, but I held firm. The truth was on my side. When I finished and returned to my seat, Margaret squeezed my hand. "You were perfect," she whispered. Richard called his own witnesses, friends of Linda's who testified she was a devoted wife, the church priest who spoke of the close-knit Williams family, but it all sounded hollow against the weight of the evidence we had presented. Finally, on the last day of the trial, Richard called Linda to the stand. She stood, smoothed her black dress, and walked to the witness box. Her performance was flawless. A trembling voice, moist eyes, nervous hands. "Mrs. Williams," Richard began, "can you tell us about your marriage to Thomas?" "He was the love of my life," Linda said, her voice barely a whisper. 32 years together. We had our challenges, like any couple, but we loved each other deeply. And the will? Tom was very worried about me. He knew I'd be alone, without him. He wanted to make sure I was protected. It was his idea to revise the will, not mine. It was a blatant lie, but she told it with such conviction that for a moment, even I doubted my own memory. Margaret stood up for the cross-examination, and she was devastating. "Mrs. Williams, you said it was your husband's idea to revise the will." "Yes." "Then why did your husband write in his personal journal days before that you were pressuring him, that it was the third time that week you had bothered him about it?" Linda hesitated. I don't know what he was talking about. He was confused from the medication." "So confused he could write clearly in a journal? With specific dates? Coherent details?" "Objection," Richard tried, but the judge waved for Margaret to continue. "Mrs. Williams, did you tell Mr. Williams in 1990 that you were pregnant?" Linda turned pale. Yes, but I later lost the baby." "How strange, because there are no medical records of a pregnancy or a miscarriage. No record of you visiting a doctor during that time. Nothing." "It was very early. I hadn't even been to a doctor yet." "Very convenient. And your fiancé had just gone back to his ex-girlfriend 2 weeks before the wedding, hadn't he? And suddenly you had a pregnancy that brought him back?" "Objection! Speculation!" Richard was practically shouting now. "Your Honor, I'm establishing a pattern," Margaret said calmly. "Allowed," said Judge Chen, and for the first time, I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Anger. Margaret spent the next 2 hours destroying Linda's story, contradiction by contradiction, lie by lie. When she finally finished, Linda was shaking, real tears streaming down her face for the first time. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage from someone who was losing control. The closing arguments were the next day. Richard did the best he could, but his heart wasn't in it. He knew he was defending a lost cause. Margaret stood and looked directly at Judge Chen. Your Honor, this case is about power and control. Linda Williams controlled Thomas Williams from before their marriage through manipulation and deceit. She controlled him during the marriage through guilt and emotional pressure. And when he was dying, when he was at his weakest and most vulnerable, she used that same pattern of control to force him to disinherit the daughter he loved. This isn't about the money. It's about justice. It's about ensuring that Thomas Williams's true wishes are honored, not the wishes that were forced upon him by a woman who manipulated him his entire life, but the wishes he expressed when he still had the strength to resist her. The will from 7 years ago reflects the true heart of Thomas Williams, and it is that will we ask to be honored. Judge Chen called for a 2-hour recess to deliberate. It was the longest 2 hours of my life. Margaret and I went to a nearby cafe, but I couldn't eat anything. My stomach was in knots. "Whatever the decision," Margaret said, "you did the right thing. You fought. Your father would be proud." When we returned to the courthouse, the room was even more crowded. The news had spread through Cedar Falls. This wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. It was about a respected widow being exposed as a manipulator. It was the kind of drama small towns love. Judge Chen entered, her face unreadable. Everyone rose, then sat as she gestured. She adjusted her glasses, looked down at her papers, and then at us. "This has been an unusually disturbing case," she began. "I've had to weigh issues of mental capacity, undue influence, and the rights of a wife versus the rights of a daughter. But above all, I have had to consider one question. What were the true wishes of Thomas Williams?" She paused, and I felt my heart nearly stop. After reviewing all the evidence, the testimonies, and the medical records, I have come to a clear conclusion. The will, dated January 15th, was created under extremely questionable circumstances. Mr. Williams was fresh out of a hospitalization, on heavy pain medication, and clearly under significant emotional pressure from his wife. His own journal documents this pressure. His best friend testified to his immediate regret. His doctor testified that he was in no condition to make such decisions. Linda was leaning forward, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly I thought she might break them. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the evidence presented by Mrs. Foster established a pattern of manipulative behavior dating back to the beginning of the Williamses' marriage. This pattern is consistent with the behavior alleged in relation to the second will." She looked directly at Linda. "Therefore, it is the decision of this court that the will of January 15th is declared null and void. The previous will, dated 7 years ago, will be recognized as the last valid testament of Thomas Williams." The room exploded. Linda shot to her feet, shouting, "This is absurd! That house is mine! Mine! I earned every inch of it after 32 years with that man!" "Order!" The judge banged her gavel. "Mrs. Williams, control yourself or you will be removed from the courtroom." But Linda was beyond control now. 3 decades of carefully maintained masks were crumbling. He was weak, always was. I built that life. I held that family together. And this ungrateful brat thinks she can just steal what's mine? "Mrs. Williams," Judge Chen was on her feet now. "One more word and you will be in contempt of court." Richard tried to calm Linda, pulling her arm, but she shoved him away. "No, I will not accept this. That house is mine." "Mom," I said, surprising even myself. My voice was calm, controlled. "That house was never yours. Dad built it for me, and now it's mine." Linda turned to me, and the hatred in her eyes was so intense, I took a step back. "You," she hissed. "It was always you. He always loved you more than me, always chose you, and now you're taking everything from me." "No," I said calmly. "You did this to yourself, with your lies, your manipulations. Dad would have stayed with you if you had truly loved him, but you never loved him. You only loved what he could give you." Linda raised her hand as if to strike me, but Richard caught it. 2 bailiffs moved forward, and Judge Chen banged her gavel several times. "Officers, please escort Mrs. Williams out. She clearly needs time to compose herself." As they led Linda out, she was screaming, her voice echoing in the hallway. "This isn't over. You'll regret this, Emily. You'll see." But her threats sounded empty now. She had lost. Completely. Judge Chen turned to me. "Miss Williams, according to the valid will, you inherit the Cedar Falls house in its entirety. Your mother will receive 50% of the remaining liquid assets as specified in the will. The cabin on Crater Lake will also be divided. It can be sold and the proceeds split, or one party can buy out the other." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said, my voice breaking. When I walked out of the courthouse that afternoon, the sun was setting over Medford. Margaret hugged me tightly. "You did it," she said. "You really did it." I had. But as I drove back to Portland, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relief and sadness. Sadness for my father's wasted marriage, for the years he lost trapped in a lie. Sadness that my mother had revealed herself so completely, and there was no coming back from it. But I also felt something else, strength. For the first time in my life, I had fought for myself and won. I was no longer the too emotional daughter who couldn't handle tough decisions. I was someone who had faced manipulation, family pressure, a public smear campaign, and still stood firm in the truth. Dad would be proud. And to you who are listening now, who has followed every twist and turn of this story, I need to say something. Maybe you're going through your own family battle right now. Maybe someone is trying to make you feel small, weak, incapable. Maybe they're telling you that you're too sensitive or too emotional to handle important things. Don't believe them. Your sensitivity is your power, not your weakness. Your emotion means you care deeply about what is right. And when you stand up to fight for the truth, you are so much stronger than any manipulator will ever be. This story was hard to tell. There were times I wanted to give up, to take the settlement, to avoid the confrontation. But I learned something important. Peace bought by silencing your truth is not real peace. It's just another form of control. So subscribe, comment, share your story, because we need each other. We need to know we're not alone in these battles, and together we are unbreakable. But the story doesn't end here, because what happens after you win in court? How do you rebuild your life when your family is broken, when half the people you've known your whole life hate you, when you finally have to face the emptiness left by all those years of manipulation? That comes next, and it might be the most important part of all. The first time I walked into the house after the court's decision was 2 weeks after the trial. I had put it off, finding excuses, because I knew it would be difficult. But Margaret was right when she said I needed to face it. The house was exactly as I remembered, yet at the same time, completely different. It was mine now, legally, officially mine, but it didn't feel like mine. It felt haunted by ghosts of conversations, memories, moments that could never be recovered. Linda had moved her things out a week earlier, under legal supervision. She took the furniture that was hers, her clothes, personal items, but she also took things that weren't hers, family photos, albums from when I was a child, small keepsakes Dad had saved over the years. It was her final form of control, her last way to hurt me. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The living room where Dad used to read the paper every morning. The kitchen where he taught me to make perfect pancakes. His upstairs bedroom, still smelling faintly of his cologne and medicine. And then I went to the basement, the place where it all began, where Dad had taught me how to use tools, where we had spent countless weekends building projects together. His workbench was still there, covered in dust now, but with his tools neatly organized, exactly as he always kept them. It was there, in the basement, that I finally cried. Not delicate, polite tears, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that came from the bottom of my soul. I cried for Dad, trapped in a loveless marriage for over 30 years. I cried for the family I had lost, for the cousins and aunts and uncles who had chosen to believe Linda's lies. I cried for the little girl I had been, growing up in a house where love was present, but always tinged with unspoken tension and unhappiness. And then, eventually, the tears stopped, and I started to plan. In the following months, I transformed that house. Not drastically, not erasing Dad, but making it my own. I painted walls, changed curtains, rearranged furniture. I converted the guest room into an office. I turned the basement into an art studio, something I had always wanted but never had the courage to try. And slowly, very slowly, the house began to feel like a home. But the repercussions of the trial echoed through Cedar Falls like ripples in a pond. The town was divided. Some supported Linda, believing her version as the wronged widow. Others, especially those who truly knew Dad, sided with me. Conversations would stop when I walked into places, glances were exchanged, whispers followed in my wake. George Martinez became an unlikely ally. He started coming to the house regularly, bringing tools and helping with repairs. Not because I needed the help, but because he needed to feel connected to the friend he had lost. "Tom told me, he said one day as we were fixing the backyard fence, years ago, about how he felt trapped. I told him to leave, to get a divorce, but he said he couldn't, because of you, partly. He didn't want you to grow up in a broken home, and partly out of pride or fear or that damn Catholic work ethic that said you don't give up on things." "I wish he had left," I said quietly. "I wish he had chosen happiness." "Me too. But in the end, he chose you. That first will, he showed it to me when he made it. He said, 'Everything I've built, I built thinking of her. Linda can have half the money, but the house is for Emily. It always was.' Those words meant more to me than the court's decision, because they confirmed what my heart had always known. Dad loved me. And despite all the pressure, despite all the manipulation, deep down, he had never really given up on me. Linda, meanwhile, did not accept defeat gracefully. She tried to appeal the decision, but was denied. She spread increasingly wild rumors about me. I had forged Dad's diary. I had bribed witnesses. I was a sociopath who had manipulated a dying man. But the lies became more and more transparent, especially after Richard Hoffman was publicly reprimanded by the Oregon State Bar for ethical misconduct. The investigation into his role in creating the second will revealed he had been negligent at best and complicit at worst. His reputation in Cedar Falls was ruined. And Linda, without a lawyer willing to defend her and with no credibility left, finally gave up trying to harm me. But she never apologized, never admitted she was wrong. She just disappeared from my life. I heard through the Cedar Falls grapevine that she moved to Florida to live near her sister, that she told anyone who would listen that her ungrateful daughter had stolen her inheritance. But people stopped believing, or they stopped caring. The strangest part of life after the trial was discovering who I was without Linda's shadow hanging over me. For 28 years, I had defined myself in relation to her, trying to please her, disappointing her, rebelling against her, trying to understand her. Now she was gone, and I was free. It was scary at first, like I was floating in space with no tether. But slowly, I began to anchor myself again. not to family, not to other people's expectations, but to my own values, my own dreams. I went back to work, but not for the company in Seattle. Instead, I started freelancing in digital marketing, working from home. It gave me flexibility and time to explore other passions. I started painting, something I had loved as a child, but abandoned under Linda's constant criticism. I started writing, documenting my journey, processing my feelings. And slowly, very slowly, I began to rebuild relationships with family members who had remained silent during the trial. Some never came back, permanently convinced by Linda's lies. But others reached out with hesitant apologies and careful questions. My cousin Sarah was the first. She showed up at my door one day, 6 months after the trial, her eyes red and swollen. "Emily, I'm so sorry," she burst out before I could even say hello. "I believed her. I believed everything Aunt Linda said about you. But then I heard stories. I saw documents from the trial that were made public, and I realized she lied about everything." I invited Sarah in, made tea, and we talked for hours. She told me about her own experiences with Linda, moments when she had felt that same manipulation but had dismissed it, how Linda had a way of making you feel crazy for questioning her. "She's good at that," Sarah said, "at making you doubt your own reality, at making her lies sound more true than anyone else's truth." "I know," I replied. "I grew up with it. It took me 28 years to really see it." Others followed Sarah. Not all of them, but enough. And slowly my family began to heal. Not by going back to what it was, but by becoming something new. Something built on honesty instead of appearances, on real support instead of toxic expectations. The first Christmas after the trial was surreal. I celebrated it at the house, Dad's house, my house now. I invited George and his wife, Sarah and her husband, a few other friends of Dad's who had remained loyal. We cooked together, laughed, shared memories of Dad that were genuine, not sanitized through the filter of Linda's deceit. And for the first time in my life, a family holiday wasn't fraught with unspoken resentment and passive-aggressive manipulation. It was just nice, warm, real. But the most important lesson I learned that year wasn't about family or inheritance or legal justice. It was about myself. All my life, I had believed what Linda told me, that I was too emotional, too sensitive, too weak to handle difficult things. I had internalized that narrative so deeply, it had become a part of who I was. But the trial showed me the truth. My emotion wasn't weakness, it was strength. It was what gave me the courage to fight when it would have been easier to give up. My sensitivity wasn't a flaw. It was what allowed me to see through Linda's lies, to sense when something was wrong, to trust my intuition, even when everyone around me said I was wrong. And I wasn't weak. God, I was not weak. I had faced the most skilled manipulator I'd ever known, had endured being cast out by my entire family, had weathered false criminal accusations and a public smear campaign, and still had stood firm in the truth. That wasn't weakness. That was raw strength. A year after the trial, on the anniversary of Dad's death, I went to visit his grave. It was a clear March day, the first signs of spring beginning to appear. I brought flowers, not the expensive ones Linda always insisted on buying to impress others, but simple wildflowers I had picked from Dad's property. He would have preferred it that way. I sat on the ground next to the headstone, leaning my back against it, and I told him everything. About the trial, about the house, about my new life. I told him how I had finally started painting again, how I had made new friends, how I was slowly learning what it meant to live authentically. "I wish you could see it," I said aloud, not caring if anyone heard. "The house is beautiful, Dad. I painted the guest room that blue you always liked. I fixed the front fence using the techniques you taught me. There's a garden growing in the backyard now, tomatoes and zucchini and herbs. you would have been proud." The wind blew gently through the trees, and I could have sworn I heard his voice in it. "I was always proud, honey. Always." Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't bitter tears. They were cleansing, healing. "Thank you," I whispered, "for fighting for me when you could, for loving me enough to leave me the house, for showing me that true love isn't control, it's liberation." I stayed there for an hour, just feeling the sun on my face, listening to the birds, feeling connected to Dad in a way I never had when he was alive. Because now I finally understood. He had done the best he could under impossible circumstances, and his final act of love was giving me the tools to free myself from everything that had held him captive. When I finally stood up to leave, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of all those expectations, all that manipulation, all that toxicity had finally been lifted. I was free, truly, completely free. And as I drove back to Cedar Falls, to the house Dad had built, to the life I was building, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time: hope and joy and peace. 2 years have passed since that day in the courtroom, 2 years since I faced my mother and won, and my life now would be unrecognizable to the scared, insecure woman who had sat in Margaret Chen's office that first day. The house in Cedar Falls has become more than just a home. It's become a sanctuary. I finished the art studio in the basement, and now I spend several hours a week there, lost in colors and textures. My paintings aren't masterpieces, but they are mine, authentic, unfiltered by anyone's expectations or fear of judgment. My freelance work has thrived beyond my wildest expectations. It turns out when you're no longer spending all your emotional energy managing a toxic relationship, you have a lot more creativity and drive to offer. I've landed clients in Seattle, Portland, even San Francisco. I have more work than I can handle, and the freedom to choose projects that truly interest me. George still comes by weekly, not to fix things anymore, but just for coffee and conversation. He's become a surrogate father figure in a way, filling the void left by Dad. But he's different from Dad. He's free of all that baggage, all that unresolved sadness, and our conversations are light, filled with laughter as much as memories. Sarah and I have become close. She has a little girl now, Lily, who is 3. When Sarah asked me to be her godmother, I cried, not tears of sadness, but of pure joy at being chosen, trusted, loved in that way. "I want Lily to grow up knowing your story," Sarah told me when I accepted. "I want her to know that when someone tries to make her feel small, she can fight back, that she doesn't have to accept anyone's narrative of who she is." That touched me more than I can express. My story, my struggle, had become something bigger than just me. It had become a lesson, an example, a source of strength for others. Other family members have gradually come back too. Not all of them. Aunt Karen never spoke to me again, too deeply invested in Linda's version of reality to see the truth. Uncle Mike sent me an apologetic email, but our relationship was never the same. Some bonds, once broken, can't be fully repaired. But I've learned that's okay. Not everyone deserves a place in your life. Not every relationship needs to be saved. Sometimes letting go is the healthiest, most loving act you can do for yourself. As for Linda, I heard through Sarah that she's still in Florida. She's made new friends, apparently. She tells them her version of the story, in which she is the tragic heroine, the devoted wife betrayed by her greedy daughter. Part of me pities her. To live in a lie, to always have to maintain a facade, to never be able to be authentic must be exhausting. But another part of me just doesn't care anymore. She has no more power over me. Her opinions, her judgments, her carefully constructed narratives mean nothing to me now. And that indifference, I realized, is the ultimate form of freedom. She called me once, about a year after the trial. I hadn't changed my number, though Margaret had suggested it. Part of me was curious to see if she would ever reach out. The call came late one night. I was in the studio, working on a painting, when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer when I saw her name on the screen, but something made me pick up. Emily? Her voice was different, older, more tired. Linda. I couldn't call her mom anymore. That title felt wrong now, unearned. There was a long silence. Then she said, I was just calling to, well, I wanted you to know that your cousin David is getting married in November. Okay, I kept my voice neutral. You probably won't be invited. After everything you did, the family thinks it's for the best. Linda, I interrupted her, it's okay. I wouldn't expect to be invited, and I wouldn't go even if I were. Another silence. Then, in a voice so low I could barely hear, she said, You were such a sweet child. What happened to you? The question was so absurd, so completely out of touch that I laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but a genuinely surprised one. I grew up, I said. I learned to stand up for myself. I learned that being sweet doesn't mean being a doormat. And I learned that loving you doesn't mean letting you control me. I never tried to control you. You tried my entire life, but you won't anymore, because I won't let you. Emily, I'm your mother. No, I said calmly. You gave birth to me. But being a mother is more than biology. It's love, support, wanting what's best for your child even when it's not what you want. And you never did that. So no, you are not my mother, not in any way that matters. I heard her sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Part of me waited to feel guilt, that old programming telling me I'd been cruel, but I didn't. I just felt truth. I have to go, I said. Take care of yourself, Linda. I hung up before she could respond, and I blocked the number. It was the last time I had any contact with her, and the peace I felt after that call was profound and lasting, not because I had been cruel, but because I had been honest, and I had put up boundaries that needed to be put up decades ago. Life in Cedar Falls went on. I became part of the community in a way I never had growing up here. Without Linda's shadow, people could see me for who I really was. I made friends with neighbors, volunteered at the local library, even started teaching a Saturday art class for kids at the community center. And then, about 6 months ago, something unexpected happened. I met someone. His name was Daniel, and he had just moved to Cedar Falls from California. He was a high school English teacher, divorced for 3 years, a father to 2 teenagers who lived with him part-time. He was kind without being weak, confident without being arrogant, and when he laughed, his whole eyes lit up. We met at the library. I was looking for a book on painting techniques, and he was returning a stack of classic novels. Our hands reached for the same book on the shelf at the same time, and when our eyes met, something clicked. Sorry, he said, pulling his hand back. It was the last copy of The Grapes of Wrath. No, you go ahead, I said. I can wait until it's returned. Or, he said, his eyes twinkling with what might have been interest, we could share it. I'll read the first half, you read the second, and then we meet up to discuss. I laughed. Is that a very elaborate way of asking me on a date? He smiled. It is. Is it working? Yes, I said. Yes, it is. Our first book discussion was over coffee. The second was over dinner. The third was a hike at Crater Lake. And somewhere along the way, without me really noticing when, I fell in love. It was different from anything I had experienced before. It wasn't the dramatic, intense passion of movies. It was calm, steady, easy. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told me about his divorce, about how it had been difficult but necessary, about how he had learned that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. My ex-wife was Controlling, he said one night as we sat on the deck behind my house watching the sunset. Not in an obvious way, but in subtle ways. Always had an opinion on my clothes, my haircut, my friends, my job, and I let it happen because I thought it was love. I thought she just cared. But it wasn't love, I said quietly, understanding perfectly. No, it was control disguised of concern, and it took me years to see the difference. I told him my story then, all of it. Linda, Dad, the will, the trial. He listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he took my hand. "You are the strongest person I've ever met," he said simply. And the beautiful thing was, I believed him, because I finally believed in myself. I met his kids 3 months later, Jake, 15, and Emma, 13. They were cautious at first, which was understandable. Divorce is hard on kids, and seeing your dad dating someone new must be strange. But slowly, very slowly, we started to build something. It wasn't a traditional family, but it was real, authentic. Emma started coming to my art studio. She had a natural talent and a unique view of the world. Watching her create, seeing her confidence grow, was one of the purest joys I had ever experienced. My mom always said art was a waste of time. She told me one day while working on a landscape painting that I should focus on practical subjects like math and science. Art is practical, I said. It teaches you to see, to feel, to express things that words can't. That's not a waste of time. It's essential. Emma smiled at me, and in that smile, I saw something that made me want to cry. Gratitude and hope. Daniel and I didn't rush anything. We didn't make grand declarations or dramatic plans. We just lived, day by day, building something solid and real. He had his house, I had mine. He had his kids, I had my life. But when we were together, everything just worked. "You know what I love most about you?" he asked me one night, 6 months after our first date. We were cooking together in my kitchen, soft music playing, wine being poured. "What?" "You are completely yourself. No apologies, no pretenses. You know who you are, and you're not afraid to be that person." I stopped chopping vegetables and looked at him. I wasn't always like this. "I know, and that makes it even more impressive. You became this person. You chose to become this person." He was right. It was a choice. Every day, I chose authenticity over people-pleasing. I chose boundaries over appeasement. I chose my truth over someone else's narrative. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the old programming would creep in, whispering that I was being selfish, difficult, too emotional. But now I recognized those voices for what they were, echoes of Linda, not my real truth. 3 years after the trial, something surprising happened. I received a letter. Not an email, a real physical letter, delivered by the postman. The handwriting was familiar but shaky. Linda. I held the envelope for 3 days before I opened it. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to not even give her that small space in my life, but curiosity won. The letter was short, just 1 page, the words written in trembling, uneven lines. "Emily. My doctor told me I have cancer, lung stage 3. I'm undergoing treatment, but the prognosis isn't good. Maybe 6 months to a year. I'm not writing to ask for your sympathy or your forgiveness. I know I've lost the right to both, but there are things I need to say before it's too late. You were right about everything, about the pregnancy that never happened, about how I manipulated your father, about the will, all of it. I spent my entire life trying to control everything and everyone around me because I was so afraid. Afraid of not being enough, afraid of being abandoned, afraid that if people really knew me, they wouldn't love me. So I built masks, told lies, manipulated situations, and I lost everything that mattered in the process. I lost your father's respect. I lost you. I lost myself, if I ever even knew who that was. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know none of what happened was your fault. You weren't too emotional or too sensitive or any of the other things I said. You were perfect exactly as you were. And I was wrong to try to make you smaller so I could feel bigger. Your father loved you completely, without conditions, without reservations. And he would have been so proud of the woman you've become. I'm proud too, for what it's worth. I know I have no right to say that, but it's true. Take care of yourself, Emily. Live the life I never had the courage to live. And be happy. Please be happy. Linda. I held the letter with trembling hands, tears streaming down my face. They weren't tears of reconciliation or immediate forgiveness. They were tears for the tragedy of it all, for a woman who spent her whole life so afraid that she never got to really live, for a mother-daughter relationship that could have been beautiful but was poisoned from the start. I showed the letter to Daniel that night. He read it in silence, then looked at me. How do you feel? I don't know, I admitted. Sad, I think, but not in the way I would expect. I don't feel responsible for her. I don't feel like I need to rush over there and fix things. You don't, he said gently. She made her choices, and you made yours, and it's okay to let it be. He was right. I didn't owe Linda anything. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not a deathbed reunion. But after thinking about it for a few days, I wrote back. Not a long letter, just a few lines. Linda, I received your letter. Thank you for your honesty, even if it took so long. I can't say I forgive you. Not yet. Maybe never. The damage you caused was too deep, too lasting. But I can say this. I hope you find some peace in your remaining days. I hope you can stop fighting long enough to just be. And I hope that, in the end, you find a way to forgive yourself, even if I can't. I am happy, really, genuinely happy. And you were right. Dad would be proud. Take care, Emily. I sent the letter, and then I let it go. There was no more correspondence after that. Linda died 4 months later, in Florida, surrounded by her sister and a few friends. Sarah called to tell me, "The funeral is on Friday, in Tampa. Are you going?" I thought about it. I thought about closure, about final goodbyes, about all those things people say you need to do. "No," I said finally. "I've already said my goodbyes, in the way I needed to." Sarah understood. "I'll represent the family then. I'll make sure she has a decent service." "Thank you." I paused. "Sarah, can you put some flowers from me? Those simple wildflowers she always hated. I think she might finally understand now." Sarah laughed, a wet laugh. "I'll do that." On the day of Linda's funeral, I didn't go to Tampa. Instead, I went to Dad's grave. I sat on the familiar ground next to his headstone and told him everything. "She's gone, Dad," I said, "and I know part of you probably still loved her, despite everything. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry it didn't work out. I'm sorry you both couldn't find happiness together." The wind blew gently, making the leaves whisper. "But I also want to thank you for fighting for me in that first will, for giving me this house, this home, for showing me what true love looks like, even if you couldn't live it in your marriage." I sat in silence for a long time, just feeling his presence in a way I can't rationally explain. And then, as the sun began to set, I finally said the words I had been holding back for so long. "I forgive her, Dad. Not because she deserves it, but because I deserve to be free. Free from the anger, the resentment, all that weight I've been carrying. So I forgive her, and I let her go." And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Not dramatic, not like in the movies, but real. An unfurling, a softening, a peace that settled into places that had been tense for years. I drove home as the sun painted the sky orange and pink, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly whole. Not because I had a perfect family or a perfect relationship or a perfect life, but because I was finally completely myself. No apologies, no masks, no fear. The house that Dad built was waiting when I got home. Daniel was there, he had promised to make dinner. The lights were on, music was floating through the open windows, and I could smell something delicious cooking. When I walked in, he turned from the stove and smiled. "How was it?" "Good," I said, and it was true. It was really good. He crossed the kitchen and held me, and I melted into his arms. This was home, I realized. Not just a house, not just a place, but this feeling of safety, of acceptance, of being loved for exactly who you are. "I love you," I said. The words came easily, without fear or hesitation. "I love you too," he replied. "So proud of you, every day." That night, we sat on the deck, watching the stars, and I thought about the path that had brought me here. Dad dying, Linda manipulating, the will, the trial, years of rebuilding and healing. It was painful. It was hard. There were moments I didn't think I would survive it. But I did. More than that, I thrived, and I became someone who would have made Dad proud, someone who would have made even the scared girl I used to be proud. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, squeezing my hand. "That they used to tell me I was too emotional to handle hard things," I said, "and that it was my emotion that gave me the strength to handle the hardest thing I've ever faced." He kissed my temple. "Your emotion is your superpower." And he was absolutely right. 4 years after that first day in Margaret Chen's office, my life was unrecognizable. I had my work, my art, my house, my man, my friends, my rebuilt family. I had peace, I had joy, I had authenticity. And most importantly, I had myself, the real me, not the version Linda had tried to create, not the too emotional girl who was taught to be smaller, quieter, easier to control, but the woman who fought for her truth and won. The woman who said no to manipulation and yes to authenticity. The woman who honored her father's memory by living the exact life he would have wanted for her. A life lived bravely, honestly, freely. And every time I walk through the rooms of the house Dad built, every time I touch the wood he cut with his own hands, every time I look out the windows at the yard where he taught me to use tools, I feel him here with me. Not haunting, but celebrating, proud, happy, free at last from the chains that held him captive in life. And I honor his memory not through endless grief or lingering anger, but through joy, through living fully, through being exactly who I am, without fear or apology. Because in the end, that was the real inheritance Dad left me. Not the house, though I love it, not the money, though it helped, but the lesson that you can be trapped your whole life by fear and still, at the end, make one choice that sets free the ones you love. He set me free, and now it's up to me to honor that by living free. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Every day, with every breath, with every choice. Living free, living authentically, living my truth. And that, I've discovered, is the best revenge of all. Not against Linda, because she doesn't matter anymore, but against all those voices that tell you you're too much, too sensitive, too emotional, too difficult. To live so fully, so authentically, so joyfully, that you prove every single one of those voices wrong. Not by being perfect, but by being you. And that is the most powerful story of all. This was my story, the story of how I was called too emotional to handle the will, and how I let the lawyer, the justice system, and the truth handle my mother instead. But more importantly, it's the story of how I learned that being too emotional was never my weakness. It was my strength all along. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness to this journey. And if you are going through your own battle right now, know this: you are stronger than you think. Your emotion is power. Your truth is worth fighting for. And in the end, authenticity always, always wins. Always. Always.